Good afternoon, and I want to first thank Art Basel for bringing us together in this constellation, which I'm very happy about, and also want to thank you for being part of this conversation about curating at the Periphery. I am Reto Thüring, Associate Curator of Contemporary Art at the Cleveland Museum of Art. And we struggled quite a bit with the title of this panel, especially with the last word in it, periphery. And then I'm well aware of the difficulties that this term might bring with it, and the dichotomy that it implies, always referencing something else, which is a center. And there certainly has been like a huge shift in terms of, we can now speak of very different peripheries and centers and the relationship within that, or these constellations. But my hope really today is that we are not getting trapped in any discussions really about terminology, but that we can really just speak about the very reality of working and curating where we all, most of our times, work at, and in the places that we live in and work at. So I really hope we can mostly just speak about our experiences working in Reims, in Oak Park, and at the Poor Farm in Columbus and in Glarus, and to speak about and address the potential that there is, what it means to work there, but also maybe the difficulties and the problems that one encounters being in these places, and but also maybe and mostly the strategies that one can apply to sort of react to these difficulties. And I want to quickly introduce the panelists. On the far right is Florence Derieux, who you may know and certainly read her name all over the place this week because she curated Art Basel Parcours. But beside that, she is also the director of the FRAC Champagne-Ardenne in Reims. She before worked at Le Magasin and Palais de Tokyo, amongst other places. Then next to her is Michelle Grabner, who is an artist, art critic, a writer, a teacher, and also a curator. She just recently curated the Whitney Biennial, which closed yesterday. And but also she is running, together with her husband, Brad Killam, Michelle runs the Suburban in Oak Park, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago. And I think you opened in 98, 15 years ago, and over these 15 years, they have shown more than 200 artists there. And more recently, in 2008, Michelle also opened a new initiative, which is the Poor Farm in Wisconsin, in a rural area called Little Wolf, where they do workshops, but also sort of exhibitions with a very long time span. Then David Norr, who I had the pleasure to work with next door in Cleveland for a while, where he was the chief curator of MoCA Cleveland, before he moved very recently, I think this March, to become senior curator of exhibitions at the Wexner Center for the Arts, also in Ohio, but in Columbus. And then next to me is Sabine Rusterholz Petko, who worked, I think, before in Lucerne, and then in Solothurn, and then in 2008 went to become the director of the Kunsthaus Glarus, a place in a very regional area in Switzerland with an extremely ambitious program that I personally very much admire. And she also very recently co-curated the Klöntal Triennale, which is sort of a triennial that takes place in the mountainscape of and around Glarus. So I really want to start with just asking the four of you to tell a little bit about your experiences in working where you work and how you address, being at the periphery, and how you sort of deal with that, how you respond to it, and which strategies you sort of apply to sort of even maybe turn the negative points of being there into something that might be positive. And I think I want to start with Michelle, because I think the discrepancy between, being a co-curator of the Whitney Biennial in an art center like no other, but also having the experience of worked in, all the other places you work. I think I want to sort of start with that.
Sure. Thank you, Reto. I think it's a good story, quite honestly, and I'll talk a little bit about the exhibition spaces that Reto introduced. The Suburban is an exhibition space, a very small exhibition space in Oak Park, Illinois. It's a first-ring suburb of Chicago, and since early 1999, we've been bringing artists in, international artists for the most part, people that you will recognize, whether it's Luc Tuymans or Katerina Grossa, to local artists from Madison, Wisconsin, Cleveland, Ohio, and so forth. So we've been doing that for quite some time, and they're typical exhibitions in which every 8 weeks they rotate. But there's something important. Chicago is actually a very small art town, and I would say that the majority of the artists to a small space like that, they're my students, my graduate students at the School of the Art Institute. So it really has a pedagogical relationship to teaching and to some of the graduate programs in the city. In 2008, my husband and I decided to rethink that, would continue with the Suburban, but to open an exhibition space, which is actually very, very huge in rural Wisconsin, in which exhibitions last for an entire year. There's a free school that's part of that as well. So very different locations. We often talk about the Poor Farm as being the Suburban's rural cousin. But different things can happen in these different locations, these different constructions. So we've been working our asses off in the Midwest for quite some time, and as a result, I'm swinging back around to the Biennial, to the Whitney Museum of American Art, that the curators there for the 2014 Whitney Biennial were really interested in not representing the Biennial with New York curators. They wanted to go outside. So they selected 3 curators. I was one of them. There was another curator from Philadelphia named Anthony Elms, and Stuart Comer, who was at the Tate Modern. But because the center always polls, Stuart is now a chief curator at MoMA. That happened during the process of the Biennial. The reason I was asked to participate as a curator for a biennial, for the Whitney Biennial in New York, is because I was working very diligently for many, many years off-center in the middle of the United States. So there's this kind of beautiful thing that things will circle back around. Reto, you asked about kind of the negative things. You actually think you're working in obscurity, but clearly I didn't know the curators personally at the Whitney who ended up inviting me. But they've been watching, they look, they read my writing, they looked at our program and so forth. So it's really interesting. It's kind of a degree of patience in which one has to wait, and it's always surprising in terms of who's watching and who's not. So that's my lovely story.
So for you, Florence, it's sort of a little bit of the same from Reims and now working in Basel and for Parcours, but I don't know, thinking about Reims, I first and foremost think about the cathedral more so than maybe, Reims being a place for a contemporary art scene. So how do you address this being sort of a local for tourism, but maybe not so much for contemporary art?
Yeah, now listening to the both of you, I was thinking about the bad side. I was remembering me moving to Reims 6 years ago and thinking what I have done. It was just really, really scary at the beginning. What's really interesting with the FRAC, we actually have one FRAC per region. So far we have 22 regions, but 23 FRACs. 2 exist in Normandy. We not only work within a city, we work within a whole region of France, a whole part. So I'm in charge with the Champagne-Ardenne region. So Reims, yes, there's the cathedral, there's the Champagne, and that's it, really. So the audience is not extremely familiar with contemporary art. We can't say that. We have to. In Reims, it's different. It's a center of the region. It's a city where most people live. It's easy, but then we have to work in the whole region, which is extremely rural. We have only 50 inhabitants per kilometers. It's really, really little. So we have an exhibition space in Reims. We have a collection, and the main goal of the institution is to tour the collection everywhere we can actually show it within the region in order to educate as many people, as many audiences as possible. So obviously, there is some extremely odd aspect of it, is that because there is not, unlike other regions in France, Champagne-Ardenne is not really developed in terms of contemporary art. There is the FRAC, there is a small art center in another city, another small city called Troyes, and that's it. We're alone. So we're the main institution, we are the relay, we are the reference for contemporary art in the whole region. So of course, for me, when I moved there, my whole world disappeared. So when I'm in Art Basel, which is very much the center of the universe of the art world for 1 week, the contrast is just not only huge, it's fantastic and overwhelming at the same time. This articulation is very interesting because what I do when I'm in the region, educating as many people as possible, really helps. When I'm here in Basel, a city that I don't know so well, I know more and more, of course, but I don't live here on a daily basis. I travel, I'm lucky enough to be able to travel very often to Basel and meet the people and discover the area, because each year, Art Basel chooses a different area of the city, a historical part of the city, different each year to develop Parcours, which is in its 5th year this year. I'm curating it for the 2nd time. So it makes it, well, my experience at the FRAC is basically where I get all the tools to be able to work extremely rapidly. I have only a couple of months to work to prepare Parcours, so that really helps a lot.
And David, I heard from both of them that, I guess, educating people that live there is a big aspect of their work. And I know that we talked a lot about these things too, because it's also about sort of not only like getting your exhibitions out into the world, but also about sort of creating a community in the place where you work that is sort of able to promote the critical discourse about the things you do, also to promote maybe art criticism and just critical thinking in general. Now, I know that the Wexner is insofar different from Cleveland that it has a huge university, so there are a lot of young people that I don't know how you sort of address that and how you get them sort of involved into the discourse. There's also an art school that is very lively.
Yeah, it's different than Cleveland. Well, I guess I would say I've never worked in a center, an art center, but certainly when you're in an institution that's not in the center, you're always identifying yourself in relationship to the center in some ways, and that's maybe an exercise that I've been engaged with at every institution that I've been at. Cleveland is different because it has an amazing collecting institution where Reto works that is profound and very dedicated to the city. The Wexner is different. The Wexner, Columbus is a smaller town. It's the capital of the state, but it didn't have a lot of the wealth at the turn of the 1900s that Cleveland had. Didn't have an industrial base, but it has a large university with 60,000 undergraduate students, so it has, and a lot of researchers, so it has ideas flowing through it. 25 years ago, in January, will be the anniversary of when we opened the Wexner Center. And the idea for this place, which was a town that didn't have any contemporary art, was to build contemporary culture, performing arts, theater, dance, music, film and video, and visual arts at a scale that could be nationally recognized. And I would say that was the consciousness of the Wexner going into it, this idea that we would bring as much international contemporary culture as we could to Columbus, Ohio. But I would say that over 25 years, this consciousness has really evolved to be something much more about an interest in how ideas key into the region and an interest in our audiences, and not only how we develop them and how we get them in the door, which is always a a pressure of institutions, but literally, how do you make place? The alienation of contemporary culture to a context that's not exposed to it can be also something to deal with and reckon with. And in Columbus, because it's a small town and because we want people to feel as if they're valued, I work hard to find strategies to actually engage our audiences in ways that are different from just accepting bringing in the best of contemporary art into a place like Columbus. And, that's probably something we could talk about more.
Okay, I think I want to continue at that point right afterwards. But Sabine, I think for you, what would interest me most is that, one could say, in like relatively spoken, Glarus is so close to Zurich, like maybe 80 kilometers away. But still, I know I've been there a couple of times, and being in Glarus, it really feels like sort of the end of the world in some ways. And I think there's really nothing in terms of culture beside the Kunsthaus that produces on such a level and with such ambition. So how does that feel, and what are your experiences?
Yes, as probably all of you said before, it's sometimes a strange feeling to work in a place like that. You feel like being alone, sitting on your desk, and alone in this universe. But let's say Glarus is is a very small place with about 9,000 inhabitants. They had the textile industry in the 18th until mid-20th century that brought quite a small bourgeoisie with affinity to a little bit of arts. But mostly at these times they disappear into cities again, and we are left there with quite minimal of knowledge about culture and art. But my strategy was, and also of the curators before, has been to integrate the topics that are there, to integrate, to invite people or the artists to use or to work with the issues that are present in the valley. I've invited them to work with the collection, to work with the house, with the architecture of the Kunsthaus, which is a very, very nice and interesting one from the 50s. It's a modern pavilion building, which is always very interesting for the artists to work with. I also ask them to reflect on the history, and it has been a way, I think, to take the audience by their hands, because they know what the artists are talking about, but also to give new perspectives to the artists. And it has so far, I think, been a good strategy to work with the periphery, it seems.
Okay, so now going 2 steps further, I think I want to sort of address 2 topics first. One is sort of how do you address your audience, like your local audience, and the second one is how you sort of get maybe beyond that and talking about distribution, and how can you sort of project what you do in these places like out into the world and to a bigger audience that is not only physically, available, but sort of maybe digitally or whatever. And I know for Florence, I think I said it before. I guess most of the people that come to your place are maybe tourists that, visit the region for very different reasons. So in terms of really programming, how do you specifically address that, and how do you find that balance? And that goes for all of us, I think, between, addressing your audience, but also maybe trying to raise the bar, and also sort of trying to really just do what you're, what are your own convictions and what your passion is?
Well, for me, so I arrived in 2008, so 6 years ago, and all the FRACs were created in '82. the FRAC Champagne-Ardenne was created in '84. And if I say that, it's because I really, truly inherited a history. All the directors before me had to go through things that I could not even believe when I found documentations, letters mostly coming from the politicians, that retrace the history, very short history, apparently, because we didn't have a building until 1991. And from that moment, we had really exhibitions on site, and problems started. Politicians, endlessly were writing letters to complain. So the 4 directors that directed the FRAC before me had to go through so much. It's unbelievable when you think it's 91 is already like yesterday. So that's a very interesting moment. And I'm lucky because they really had to go through processes that I'm happy that I don't have to go through today, which allowed me to have a very international program and show sometimes artwork which are pretty dry, very conceptual, sometimes very difficult for the audience, but without having too much to work on this itself. Surprisingly, it's been 30 years of history of exhibitions with the FRAC, and since '91 we have this exhibition space, and believe it or not, the audience is really very open-minded, at least much more open-minded than any politician pretend they are. And we have really a lot of people coming, although the institution is pretty invisible within the city for some reasons. Nevertheless, there's a really great interest. So what I do is that, as you said, Reto, I do exactly the program I want to do, without thinking, is it good for the audience or is it good even for the politician? We have been doing really a program that could have been shown in Paris. And the proximity with Paris helps in terms of I can invite every single artist. I have the champagne and I'm 45 minutes away from Paris. So basically everybody is happy to come. So this whole history of exhibition, can you imagine that in '94, Chris Burden had a big exhibition entirely produced at the FRAC. So suddenly, the FRAC Champagne-Ardenne was on the map, and it's been on the map since we have a space. For that reason, that some of the greatest artists came and produced works. So the relationship with the population has always been very strong, because the artists were invited right from the beginning to work within the region. So we do exhibition also through residencies outside, but I think the contact with the partners, with the population, makes the whole process very smooth at the end of the day. Plus, now we have, in the past years, a lot of press. And as soon as there is press, as soon as there is television, people will think clearly, this is good, and they are proud. And I always work on the pride. This is the trick I use, basically, most of the time. I have to admit.
So, David, how do you consider your audience in Columbus or not?
Well, I think audience is a big pressure always. It's interesting. I think that in terms of our history, which is also short, and we're a non-collecting museum, but we're very large. Time is always precious, and we've done some practical things to allow engagement to happen in a kind of longer-term format. That said, we've been successful with a lot of different things. We've been successful at doing large-scale exhibitions that travel to the Whitney or to MoCA LA, and that's not something that an institution in Columbus, Ohio can't celebrate. On the other hand, one of our focuses is to work directly with artists in deep and profound ways, and we have a large budget dedicated to artist residencies, and we probably have artists in town about 150 to 200 days a year, which is a lot. And that's really our foundation of thinking about engagement stems out of that residency program, which doesn't always shift into an exhibition. It's really about continuing artistic process at the Institute, and it's cross-disciplinary, so it's visual artists, it's performing artists, and it's filmmakers. And artists come also, we don't have pressures to do things that you might have to do in Paris or in New York. I mean, you can be hermetically working quietly, going about your business. We have beer. We don't have champagne. We have the Ohio State Buckeye football team, things like that. I mean, these are all important. But we also have a quiet place to work, and we have university resources as well. So this is something that I think is also important. It's the kind of diligence that you do before an exhibition and the diligence that you do after an exhibition. Of course, I want my program to be as important and as critical to the dialogue that's happening in contemporary art, but I don't want it to look like it looks anywhere else. And that's an individual goal, but I think it's an important one that helps shape what can be interesting about a place like Columbus, Ohio, for artists and for people. Connecting our faculty of 15,000 in Columbus, at least some of them who are interested, to the ideas that we are trying to shape with artists at the Wexner is of extreme value, because we'll get thousands of students in, and those 1,000 students write a paper or they contribute to some dialogues. And we have probably our biggest department is our education department, and our education department is obsessed with that kind of engagement that extends around the exhibition, that starts before it happens and that continues onward while the exhibition is happening. And that, you know, that's something that I value about being in a place like the Wexner. It's different than a private museum that I've been at, where your mission is focused on fundraising. This is another part of our mission that gives back, so to speak, and helps shape what we do in the future.
One more thing to ask, speaking by my own experience, does having the artist present really help? Because it helped me in Cleveland a lot, sort of get people excited about a show and really sort of create an entry point for people that are maybe not so educated. So if you say you have like residencies, so like,
well, I think it helps two things. One, just fundamentally, philosophically, their presence helps shape what they do and connect in some way. It's organic. It's not prescriptive. That understanding of place just alters the way that they think about the exhibition context, their presence in the place, the work that they do. It filters in. I mean, you can't resist the Ohio State Buckeyes. So I think it does. And then on the other hand, you know, we use them for engagement. Engagement, obviously, we, you know, promote talks and we get them involved with people, and they make long-lasting relationships with people in Columbus that have like an impact on their work and have an impact on us institutionally. And they become successes in that regard. Successes that aren't necessarily about the work itself in the museum.
Now, in terms of distribution, Michelle, I know that you sort of produced these, I think it's 2 very beautiful books about the work you did at the Suburban, sort of recapitulating like what you did over these 15 years or so. Is that a way for you to retrospectively not only sort of look back, but also to really get the word out about what you've done and sort of also give credit to the artists who maybe work, you know, in a place like the Suburban where maybe only a couple of people show up per exhibition, and to sort of give them a little more of an audience?
That's exactly right, Reto. You know, the books, the catalogs we produce are for the artists. Both the Poor Farm and the Suburban, you know, it's governed by the artists. We say yes to artists. It's an artist-run project space. That's what it is. So, but it's important to know that the catalogs are also a way of archiving, right? Because we're so organic in terms of how we move forward. What kind of projects are happening at any given time, that the publication is a way of fixing that. So not only is it a nice gesture for an artist to give context into which their project was, you know, located at one point at one of these spaces, it really also does kind of fix a history that, you know, we're always on the ground, we're always moving, so it's very difficult for us to do that outside of the website. You know, some of the curatorial programs, particularly at the Poor Farm. So in addition to, you know, letting it being governed by artists, there's been two more recent projects, a Gretchen Bender survey that we put together because we can do this in rural Wisconsin. This is a project that from the distance of the Midwest, or from all of our distances, we can actually see blind spots in the center. And Gretchen Bender or Lucio Pozzi, who is right now has an exhibition up at the Poor Farm, these are artists who should be engaged in exhibitions in New York City, in institutions there. And a matter of fact, the show that we put together in Gretchen Bender ended up going to the kitchen. So it's kind of a beautiful thing to be able to originate, to use the freedoms one has when one is kind of pushed to the side, periphery if you call it, and be able to see, you have this perspective from far out, these holes that the center isn't dealing with, and to have the center then go to any one of us and say, yeah, let's take that in. We couldn't see that from, again, our compression. So that's one of the freedoms we all have as well. But then the books, again, kind of fix things down.
Have you been very careful about documenting like stuff from the start on, or is that something you sort of learned over time? Because I realized that this is something that happens quite often when you sort of work somewhere, where not a lot of people go and see it, and you just did it, and then it's gone, and maybe there's no good documentation, and so it's hard to
the visual documentation is easy. We do that, we do it thoroughly. What I regret, and maybe what my husband regrets, is that while artists come from New Zealand or Berlin, there's great conversations that are had, and I wish those were recorded. So right now, I find myself going back to an artist who showed 8 years ago and having a conversation with them. I understand that it's not going to be the same conversation, that different content will emerge, but that is what I regret. I'm afraid to over-institutionalize or create a mechanism in which that is recorded, because then something will be lost in this kind of give and take. That happens when artists come to Wisconsin or to Chicago. So that would be my regret.
Sabine, for you, I know you work on a pretty small budget where you, like at the Kunsthaus. So how do you find the balance between putting together an exhibition and like something like the Kunsthaus Triennale, and at the same time trying to be relevant in terms of publications and produce something that is lasts longer than just the event and exhibition itself?
We also try to do publications from time to time. But usually it's really the fact that the exhibitions are first, and sometimes really the money is gone for the publications. But I think one way is also to to do guided tours, artist talks, of course, to like stay in people's minds for a little longer than only the opening or the exhibition only. And now for the Kunsthaus Triennial, we had a little more resources and put some of it into like workforces, into Facebooking, and that was actually that kind of really made a big change in terms of reception, and even internationally, people now here in Basel come address me and they know about it, and it seems to really make a change to use the social media, even though usually it's quite some effort to do it.
We have about 15 more minutes to go, so I just wanted to ask quickly if there are any questions in the audience, because we can start certainly taking questions then. Okay, I see there's like two. We have a mic somewhere, so it should come.
No.
1 second.
You turn it on? Okay. Hi, my name's Ashley Connery. I'm a writer and curator. I write for Art Guide East and 7x8 Curatorian. My question's kind of long, so I've written it down and we'll read it. Is the value, it's based on a coffee I had this morning with some of the curators of 14 Rooms and generally the Art Basel situation. And they talked about the value of Art Basel for them in their career. My question to you is the value of the art fair for you the same social opportunity to collaborate with new connections and being seen, and the conversations about the value of the art here? Or is the value of Art Basel different or less because of where you're coming from? And do you think that the Basel or unlimited format succeeds at engaging a general public or only the art community? And if you could take Basel to your community, how would you change the conventions of this format? Yeah, sorry. You can pick one or two and answer whatever you like.
I heard like 20 questions at least out of that. But yeah, I mean, maybe I can. David, you seem to have
I don't. I work. My position is I don't work at a collecting institution, and frankly, we're so saturated with art fairs at this point. There's a strong annoying component to these things, and we've seen the market forces. What's going on out there is suddenly far more important than what I'm doing in a museum. So it's a relationship that we cope with. On the other hand, it's a convention of sorts of our peers, so we get a lot of business done. A lot of artists are here, and there are relationships that we have to continue. So these places become necessary parts of like working and navigating in the world. It's very practical, for me.
Quickly, I wouldn't be here if I didn't have an exhibition that opened at a commercial gallery here in Basel last Friday. I understand them to be a reality, but I want to go home and work, and I want to go back to Wisconsin to get that done.
Well, for me, obviously, I have a lot of interest. I have a lot of interest because I work for Art Basel as well as being the director of this public institution in France. As a matter of fact, it's really interesting for me to it was 2 days ago very interesting for me to discover Unlimited, because if you've seen Sterling Ruby, for instance, this is my show entirely. I worked with Sterling Ruby 2 years ago on an exhibition that started in Geneva, then came to Reims, then we traveled the show to Stockholm and then Rome. And this is the soft sculpture, which is a project that we developed. Of course, he had started working, but the exhibition as such was something that had to be very, very different from what we knew of him. Or when I discovered Nick Mauss' project here, which is fantastic. Nick Mauss had his first ever exhibition in an institution at the FRAC Champagne-Ardenne. And I work for Art Basel through Parcours. So your question regarding is Basel only addressing itself to the art community, it's actually Art Basel created Parcours 5 years ago to answer this question, to create a platform both for artists and audiences to connect the fair in much stronger ways to the city, and obviously its inhabitants and its visitors, not only the visitors coming from the art. And through Parcours, it's interesting for me to connect also the activities between the public institution with no money, almost no money, and this context. For instance, my last exhibition, the space is closed for renovation for already a year. We're going to reopen at the beginning of next year. But the last exhibition I did was with Francesco Arena. It was very interesting for me when I received this proposal from his gallery for a performance that I accepted and is now being shown as part of Parcours. Or Chris Burden, again, who had connection with the FRAC way before I became the director. And through my work with the FRAC, we have a collection, and I collect, therefore. But Chris Burden made a donation of a very, very huge piece 2 years ago, a piece that he produced as part of his exhibition in '94. And I went recently to see him to discuss the modalities of the restoration of this work that I found finally money to do. And that's when I saw the works in the studio, and I started discussing with him the possibility to do a project for Parcours, and that's as organic as it is, even though you can imagine a public institution in France outside of Paris. The budget is one of the smallest one among the FRACs, which are already very small. And working within this context of Basel, back and forth, is again the articulation. And the time, you mentioned time, this is what we have. We can have artists, the time is very different. And also, and this is, I think, fundamental, the way we understand where we stand. I always say, I work within a region, the region of Champagne-Ardenne. I'm interested in this and the international art world. The national level, for me, doesn't really matter. And it's always and moving back and forth between these two levels, really.
I'm excited to see Florence's Parcours, which I haven't seen yet. I want to say that.
Yeah, and something to add just quickly to that question in general and that discussion about center and periphery in relation to Basel, and being from Basel is certainly to consider like a place like Basel, which maybe is not really a center for contemporary art so much, then Zurich turning into, the like center of the world for a week, and what remains and what stays, and if like the city itself and the art scene, like the artists really can take away something from that, or if it's really just something like a UFO landing in a city and then going its way. But I have one more question, but maybe if there are other questions from the audience, I would certainly want to. Okay, please. There's one question there. Where is the mic? Oh.
Okay. And my name is Adriana González Brum. And I come from Paraguay. My question is, if this is Periphery, so how do you call artists and institutions that are working in countries that are completely outside of the global circuit and has no support, no institutional or government support? And how do you call that?
Well, I think we very deliberately, and I maybe should have added that at the beginning of the discussion, we sort of very deliberately sort of concentrated this panel on, what's like still the Western Hemisphere, and, so because I wanted to make sure that all of us together have sort of a common touch, like base to talk about. Because if you sort of expand this discussion about periphery to, really what's going on in Africa, South America, and so forth, I think this whole discussion would become something totally different, because then you don't talk anymore, about curating what is still sort of one economic system and one coherent system of, how the art world sort of works, and it becomes different. And it would be an extremely interesting discussion, one hopefully can take place in another or a couple of other panels, but just for the sake of, having some sort of streamlined discussion, we decided to, include institutions from Switzerland, France, and USA rather than any other country that is sort of not really at the periphery then. And then this whole relationship between center and periphery would like totally shift to another context, I think.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Ana Castro. I come from Brazil. Just a quick question. How do you choose your artists?
Please.
Well, how do I choose my artists? Luckily I have a lot of colleagues that have a lot of stake in the institution. My director's been there 20 years. There's an institutional history that's very important to us. And as I said, there are sort of successes that we have learned that we're good at. For me, I want complete institutional buy-in, and that's part of my job is basically convincing people to do what I want to do. And if I can't, then it's a kind of failure for me. So I enjoy that challenge. That's pretty much how I go through this process, is the process of elimination, basically. And when it connects with my peers and my colleagues, that's when I move forward. But I feel like choosing is one thing, but finding a way to really have the institutional backing for a project and a kind of clear understanding of why we're moving ahead with this, for me, is important, especially for a sense of longevity or sustainability. That's not to say that we don't have conversations that evolve over years about certain artists, right? So it might be, no, we're not ready for that now. no, 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 and then finally it's yes. And then maybe it's too late. But, for me, it's about a conversation with my institution itself. That's how I choose.
Sure. I sit up here in a different capacity than my colleagues. As I was saying earlier, we try to say yes to artists, even the most outrageous projects. We want that to happen. At the same time, then, what we will do is pair it with an artist we select, Lucio, who's sitting behind you. He's somebody who is very curious to me and very important to me as an artist when I was in school in the 80s, in the 90s. So if I can have a relationship to him, it's a very selfish process in which I landed on Lucio and wanted to bring him to my exhibition space and have him be there for a handful of months and kind of work out an idea. So we kind of go both ways. One is very selective, where it's very selfish, where it's people who are very important to how I think about work, and then also taking a chance on somebody we don't even know, and it's a hair scheme idea, but we can do that. We can actually say yes to that. So it really is that range.
Okay, I just heard that we have room for one more short question. After that, I think we have to stop here. So if there's no more questions, we maybe just stop. If there's one more, we could take that. Okay, so I'd like to thank all of you again for being here, and thanks to Art Basel for making this possible. And please feel free to ask us other questions and more in a personal setting after this talk. Thank you very much.